The wind that blew across King's Landing that morning carried the smell of the sea, mixed with smoke and fear. The city had seen too much blood lately. Lords whispering in dark halls, soldiers watching every shadow, and small folk praying that whoever sat the Iron Throne next would not destroy them all. Ned Stark stood in the throne room, silent and still, like the statues of the old kings in Winterfell's crypts. His grey eyes were fixed on the towering Iron Throne before him. The throne looked even more dangerous up close. Hundreds of twisted swords, melted together by dragonfire long ago, blades pointing in every direction like they were waiting for the next foolish ruler to bleed on them. Behind Ned stood the men who had helped bring down a dynasty. Robert Baratheon paced across the floor like a restless bull. His armor was scratched and dented from battle, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. "I still say it should be me sitting there," Robert muttered, glaring at the throne. "Gods know I earned it." Ned didn't turn around. "You fought bravely," he said calmly, "but a crown is not a war trophy." Robert snorted loudly. "Easy for you to say, Stark. You're the one the lords keep whispering about." And that was true. After the fall of the Targaryens, the realm had fallen into chaos. Some lords wanted Robert on the throne because of his blood claim. Others believed the realm needed a man of honor instead of a man of fury. That man was Ned Stark, the Warden of the North, the man who had led armies without cruelty, the man who kept his word when others broke theirs like rotten sticks. Even the people of King's Landing had begun whispering his name. Jon Arryn walked slowly toward them. Jon Arryn looked older than both of them, his beard silver and his face worn with responsibility. "The lords are waiting," Jon said quietly. Robert crossed his arms. "And what are they saying?" Jon sighed. "What they always say in times like these. Half of them want power, the other half want peace." Ned finally turned around. "And which one do they think I bring?" Jon Arryn looked him directly in the eyes. "Peace." The throne room fell silent. Outside, the bells of the city rang slowly in the distance. Robert let out a long breath and ran a hand through his dark hair. "7 hells," he said. "I never thought I'd see the day when the most honorable man in the 7 kingdoms was asked to become king." Ned frowned slightly. "I never wanted it." "That's exactly why they trust you," Robert replied. Jon stepped closer. "There is another problem." Ned raised an eyebrow. "What problem?" Jon's voice dropped. "The Lannisters." Even speaking, the name felt dangerous. Tywin Lannister had arrived in the city only days ago with a massive army. He claimed he came to support the rebellion, but no one truly believed that. Tywin Lannister supported only one thing: power. And whoever sat the throne would either become his ally or his enemy. Robert laughed bitterly. That lion waited until the war was almost over before showing his claws. Ned's jaw tightened. "What does he want?" Jon Arryn answered carefully. "Influence, control, perhaps a royal marriage." Robert rolled his eyes. "He probably wants his daughter to become queen." That daughter was Cersei Lannister, one of the most ambitious women in the 7 kingdoms. Ned walked slowly toward the throne. Each step echoed across the hall. "I will not trade the realm's future for political games," he said firmly. Robert laughed again. "Then you might be the worst politician in history." Ned stopped in front of the throne. He stared at it for a long moment. Back in Winterfell, life had always been simple. Justice was clear. Loyalty meant something. But here in King's Landing, every smile hid a dagger. Jon Arryn spoke softly. "If you refuse the throne, the realm may fall into another war. The lords are divided. Robert inspires loyalty, but also fear. Tywin inspires obedience, but never love. Robert looked at Ned. So it comes down to you, old friend. Ned slowly turned toward them. I fought this war to free the realm from tyranny, he said, not to place another tyrant on the throne. Jon nodded. Then perhaps the realm needs a king who does not want to be king. The throne room doors suddenly opened. A messenger rushed inside, breathless. My lords. Everyone turned. What is it? Robert demanded. The messenger dropped to one knee. Lord Tywin Lannister requests an audience. Robert laughed darkly. Of course he does. Ned looked back at the Iron Throne. For the first time, he placed a hand on one of the cold metal swords. The blade was sharp. It cut slightly into his palm. Blood ran down the steel. Ned Stark did not flinch. If the realm needs a king, he said quietly, then I will not hide from duty. Robert stared at him. Jon Arryn watched silently. Ned turned toward the doors. Send Lord Tywin in. Because, from this moment forward, the fate of the Seven Kingdoms would change forever. The heavy doors of the throne room slowly opened, and the sound echoed across the massive hall. Every man inside turned their attention toward the entrance. The guards stepped aside as Tywin Lannister walked in with calm, calculated steps. His golden armor reflected the torchlight on the walls, and the crimson cloak of his house dragged behind him like a pool of blood. He didn't rush. He didn't bow immediately. Tywin Lannister was the kind of man who believed the world should bend toward him, not the other way around. Ned Stark stood beside the Iron Throne, his hands still faintly stained with blood from the sharp blade that had cut his palm moments ago. He watched Tywin approach with the same quiet seriousness he carried into battle. Behind Ned, Robert Baratheon leaned against a pillar with his arms crossed, looking like he was already annoyed by the conversation that hadn't even started yet. Jon Arryn stood between them, calm as always, but his eyes carefully studied every movement Tywin made. Tywin finally stopped a few steps away from the throne. For a moment, he simply looked around the hall, as if measuring the power in the room. His green eyes rested on Robert, then Jon Arryn, and finally on Ned Stark. Lord Stark, Tywin said in a calm voice, I see the rumors in the city were true. Ned did not move. Rumors travel quickly in King's Landing. They do, Tywin replied, especially when the North suddenly stands beside the throne. There was silence for a moment. Robert pushed himself off the pillar and walked forward. If you came here to speak in riddles, Lion, I suggest you stop. We've all had enough of games. Tywin's expression didn't change. I don't play games, Lord Baratheon. I deal in realities. Robert laughed harshly. Funny, the reality I remember is you sitting safely at Casterly Rock while the rest of us bled in battle. Tywin didn't react to the insult. If anything, he looked bored. The war is over, he said calmly. What matters now is who rules the realm. His eyes slowly moved toward the towering throne again. And more importantly, how they rule it. Ned stepped forward slightly. His voice remained steady, but there was iron behind it. The realm needs peace. Tywin nodded slowly, as if he expected that answer. Peace is expensive, Lord Stark. Ned met his gaze. Justice costs less. For the first time, Tywin studied him more carefully. There was something strange about Ned Stark standing next to the throne. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a man who belonged in the cold forests of the north. But sometimes, the most dangerous rulers were the ones who didn't crave power. Tywin folded his hands behind his back. The lords of the realm are speaking your name. They believe you may soon become king. Robert snorted loudly. May, the throne's practically begging him to sit down. Ned ignored the comment. And what does House Lannister believe? Tywin's answer came without hesitation. House Lannister believes the realm must be stable. And you believe I cannot provide that? Ned asked. Tywin slightly tilted his head. I believe stability requires alliances. Robert groaned loudly. Here it comes. Tywin continued speaking as if Robert hadn't interrupted. The crown has enemies everywhere. Loyalists of the fallen dynasty are still hiding across Westeros. Armies are tired. The treasury is nearly empty. Jon Arryn quietly nodded. That much is true. Tywin's voice remained smooth. House Lannister can solve many of those problems. Robert laughed again, and let me guess, it comes with a price. Tywin looked directly at Ned. A marriage. The word hung in the air. Robert immediately burst out laughing. Gods, I knew it. Tywin continued calmly. My daughter, Cersei Lannister, would make a powerful queen. House Lannister would stand firmly behind the throne. The room fell silent. Ned Stark thought about the offer, not because he wanted power, but because he understood the consequences of refusing it. The Lannisters had the richest house in the realm and one of the largest armies. But Ned also knew something else. Power gained through fear never lasted. I already have a wife, Ned said calmly. For the first time, Tywin's expression shifted slightly. You could set aside the marriage. Ned's eyes hardened. My marriage to Catelyn Stark is not a political tool. Robert grinned widely. 7 hells, Stark, you're going to give the lion a heart attack. Tywin ignored Robert again. The realm requires sacrifice. Ned's answer came immediately. Then I will sacrifice comfort, not honor. The words echoed through the hall. Tywin stared at him for a long moment, realizing something important. Ned Stark was not like the other lords of the South. Threats, gold, and alliances meant little to a man whose loyalty was rooted in something deeper. Finally, Tywin spoke again. If you take the throne without the support of House Lannister, you will make a powerful enemy. Robert stepped forward instantly, smiling like he had been waiting for that moment. Good, he said, I was getting bored. But Ned raised his hand slightly, stopping Robert from escalating things. We do not need enemies, Ned said calmly. Tywin waited. Ned continued. But neither will the crown be controlled by fear. The tension in the room grew thick. For a moment, it looked like Tywin might push the matter further. Instead, he gave a small, respectful bow. Very well, Lord Stark. Then he said something that surprised everyone. If you truly become king, I will be watching with great interest. Tywin turned and walked toward the doors again, his crimson cloak flowing behind him. As the doors closed, Robert let out a long breath. Well, he said, that went about as badly as possible. Jon Arryn rubbed his beard thoughtfully. No, he said quietly. That went exactly as expected. Ned Stark turned once more toward the Iron Throne. He hadn't even been crowned yet. And already, the most powerful house in the realm was testing him. And deep down, Ned knew something else. If he truly became king, the Game of Thrones would become far more dangerous than any war he had ever fought. The throne room felt different after Tywin Lannister walked out. His presence had been like a shadow hanging over the hall, and even though he had left quietly, the tension he brought with him still lingered in the air. Eddard, Ned Stark stood silently near the towering Iron Throne, thinking about everything that had just happened. Outside the tall windows, the city of King's Landing was slowly returning to life after months of war, but inside the Red Keep the real battle had only just begun. Robert Baratheon broke the silence first. He walked across the hall and looked up at the throne, shaking his head with a half-amused smile. Well, Stark, looks like the 7 kingdoms are about to get the most honorable king they never asked for. Ned gave him a tired look. You speak as if this is something to celebrate. Robert laughed loudly. After all the fighting we did, of course it is. The Dragon Kings are gone. The Mad King is dead. The realm needs someone steady. He paused and smirked. Unfortunately, that someone is you. Standing nearby, Jon Arryn folded his hands calmly. The lords are already gathering in the Great Hall, Word has spread quickly. They expect a decision today. Ned frowned slightly. Today. Jon nodded. If we delay, the realm may begin tearing itself apart again. Every great house will start pushing its own claim. Robert sighed. He's right. If you don't sit on that throne soon, someone else will try. Ned looked once more at the twisted blades of the throne. It had been built by conquest and fire centuries ago. Every king who sat there had ruled with power, fear, or ambition, but Ned Stark had never been that kind of man. He had always believed a ruler should serve the people, not rule them like a tyrant. But now the entire realm was waiting. He finally spoke quietly, "Then let the lords come." Not long after, the great hall filled with powerful men and women from across Westeros. Banners hung from the tall walls, wolves, stags, roses, and lions, all watching the throne. The murmurs of nobles filled the chamber as they whispered among themselves, trying to guess what would happen next. At the center of the hall stood the Iron Throne. Ned walked forward slowly, wearing simple armor instead of royal robes. He did not look like a king dressed for ceremony. He looked like a soldier who had simply stepped into a new battlefield. Jon Arryn raised his voice so the entire hall could hear. "The war has ended," he announced. "The Dragon Kings have fallen, and the realm now stands at a crossroads. The lords of the Seven Kingdoms must recognize a ruler who will bring stability, justice, and peace." The hall grew quiet. Robert stood nearby like a giant watching the crowd, daring anyone to challenge what was about to happen. Jon continued, "Many names have been spoken, but one name rises above the rest." He turned toward Ned. "Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell." Whispers spread through the hall like wind through dry leaves. "The man who fought with honor," someone said. "The man who kept his word," another voice whispered. Ned stepped forward and faced the gathered lords. His voice was calm but carried through the chamber. "I never sought this crown," he said. "I did not fight this war to gain power." The room remained silent. "I fought because the realm was suffering under madness and cruelty. If I take this throne, it will not be for glory. It will be because the realm needs stability." He looked across the crowd, meeting the eyes of powerful nobles. "If I become king, I swear that justice will not depend on wealth or family name. The laws of the realm will protect the weak as well as the strong." Many of the lords exchanged uncertain looks. Some seemed impressed, others looked uncomfortable. Ned continued speaking. "I will not rule through fear, I will rule through duty." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then suddenly, Robert stepped forward and slammed the butt of his war hammer on the stone floor. "I support Ned Stark," he shouted loudly, "and any man who disagrees can explain it to me outside." A few nervous laughs spread across the hall. Slowly, other lords began nodding. One by one, voices began rising. "House Tully supports him. House Arryn stands with him. House Baratheon stands with him." The decision was forming like a rising tide. Finally, Jon Arryn turned to Ned and spoke the words that would change history. "Then let it be known, from this day forward, Eddard Stark shall rule the Seven Kingdoms as king." The crown of the realm was brought forward, simple, golden, and heavy with meaning. Jon Arryn carefully placed it on Ned's head. For a moment, the hall was completely silent. Then the lords of the realm knelt. "Long live the king," voices echoed. "Long live King Eddard." Ned Stark slowly turned and walked toward the Iron Throne. Every step felt heavier than the last. When he finally sat down, the cold blades of the throne pressed against his back like a reminder of the dangers that came with power. At that moment, far across the city, Tywin Lannister stood on a balcony of the Red Keep, watching the distant celebration. A servant approached carefully. "My lord, the coronation has begun." Tywin looked toward the castle with cold eyes. "So it seems." The servant hesitated. "What will House Lannister do now?" Tywin's expression remained calm. "We will do what lions always do." "And what is that, my lord?" Tywin turned slowly toward the city. "We wait, because sooner or later, the honorable king will make a mistake. And when that moment came, House Lannister would be ready." Far above the city, Ned Stark now sat upon the Iron Throne as the new ruler of the realm. But even as the crowd cheered his name, the true game of power had only just begun. And the throne had a way of testing even the most honorable men. The cheers in the great hall slowly faded as the lords of Westeros began leaving the Red Keep. The coronation had been simple compared to the grand ceremonies of past kings, but it carried a heavy meaning. For the first time in generations, a man known more for honor than ambition now sat upon the Iron Throne. Eddard, Ned Stark remained seated long after the hall had mostly emptied. The twisted blades behind his back were uncomfortable and cold, almost as if the throne itself was reminding him that ruling the realm would never be easy. The torches on the walls flickered quietly as night slowly fell over King's Landing. The sounds of celebration from the streets could be heard faintly through the open windows. The small folk were drinking and shouting the name of their new king, hopeful that the long nightmare of war had finally ended. But inside the throne room, the mood was far more serious. Jon Arryn approached slowly, carrying several scrolls in his hands. Age had made his steps slower, but his mind remained sharp as ever. He stopped a few steps away from the throne and looked up at Ned with a faint smile. "You should rest, Your Grace," Jon said gently. Ned sighed quietly. "I doubt kings rest often." Jon chuckled softly. "You would be correct." For a moment they both sat in silence, remembering the long war that had brought them here. It felt strange to think that only months ago they had been fighting to overthrow a mad king. Now the fate of the realm rested on Ned's shoulders. Jon finally handed him one of the scrolls. "Your first decisions as king cannot wait." Ned took the parchment and glanced over it. His brow tightened slightly. "The small council," he said. Jon nodded. "The realm must be governed. The positions must be filled quickly." Ned leaned back slightly on the throne. He knew the names written on that list would shape the future of the kingdom. Every position carried power, influence, and the chance for corruption. "We start with the hand of the king," Ned said quietly. Jon looked surprised. "You already know your choice." Ned looked down at him with a small smile. "I cannot think of a wiser man." Jon Arryn immediately shook his head. "Your Grace, I am an old man." "You are also the man who held the realm together when it was falling apart," Ned replied calmly. "You guided both Robert and me through this war. If I am to rule wisely, I will need your counsel." Jon looked uncertain for a moment, but he understood what Ned was asking. Finally, he gave a small bow. "Then I will serve." Ned nodded in appreciation. That decision felt right. But the next name on the list was far more complicated. The Kingsguard. Ned's eyes moved to one particular name written on the parchment. Jaime Lannister. The man who had killed the Mad King. The man many now called the Kingslayer. The throne room doors suddenly opened, and heavy footsteps echoed inside. Robert Baratheon walked in carrying a cup of wine and looking very pleased with himself. "There you are," Robert said loudly. "The city is celebrating, and our king is sitting alone in the dark." Ned gave him a tired look. "I was reading." Robert glanced at the scrolls. "Gods, you started working already. You've been king for less than a day." Jon Arryn chuckled quietly while Robert walked closer to the throne. "What's troubling you?" Robert asked. Ned showed him the parchment. Robert leaned closer and quickly spotted the name. "Oh," he said, "the pretty Lion Knight." Ned's expression stayed serious. He broke his oath. Robert shrugged. "He killed the Mad King. I'd call that a public service." Ned looked down at the floor for a moment. The truth was more complicated than that. Kingsguard knights swore sacred vows to protect the king, no matter what kind of ruler he was. Breaking that oath shook the very foundation of honor. If the Kingsguard can kill their king, Ned said quietly, then what does their oath truly mean? Robert took a long drink from his cup. It means sometimes the king deserves it. Jon Arryn stepped forward carefully. The realm sees Jaime Lannister as both hero and traitor. Whatever decision you make will send a message. Ned knew that was true. If he punished Jaime, House Lannister would see it as an insult. If he forgave him, other knights might believe their oaths meant nothing. The weight of the crown was already becoming clear. Ned finally stood up from the Iron Throne and walked slowly toward the tall windows. The lights of King's Landing spread out beneath the castle like a sea of stars. "I want him brought before me tomorrow," Ned said. Robert raised an eyebrow. "You're going to question him?" "Yes." Jon Arryn nodded thoughtfully. A wise decision. Ned turned back toward them. If a man breaks his oath for the right reason, the realm deserves to know the truth. Robert smirked. This should be interesting. But far away, in another part of the Red Keep, someone else was also thinking about Jaime Lannister. Inside a quiet chamber, Cersei Lannister stood near a candlelit table, her golden hair shining in the dim light. She had already heard the news of Ned Stark's coronation. A servant bowed nervously before her. "My lady, the new king has called for Sir Jaime to appear before him tomorrow." Cersei's green eyes narrowed slightly. "Has he?" She walked slowly to the window overlooking the city. "Then it seems our honorable king wishes to test the lions." The servant hesitated. "Should I inform Lord Tywin?" Cersei smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "No." Her voice became colder. "Let him." She looked out across the city toward the Red Keep towers, where the new king now ruled. "Because tomorrow we will learn exactly what kind of King Eddard Stark truly is. And depending on that answer, House Lannister would decide whether to support the throne or destroy it." Morning came slowly over King's Landing, and the sunlight crept through the tall windows of the Red Keep. The city below was still buzzing from the celebrations of the night before. The small folk believed a new and better time had begun. They believed the new king, Eddard, Ned Stark, would be different from the rulers they had suffered under for so long. But inside the castle walls, hope and tension were walking side by side. Ned Stark had been awake long before sunrise. Sleep had not come easily to him. The weight of the Iron Throne was heavier than any armor he had ever worn in battle. Being king meant every decision could shape the fate of thousands of people, and today would be his first real test. In the throne room, the members of the court slowly gathered. Lords, knights, and servants lined the sides of the hall, whispering quietly to each other. Everyone had heard the rumor that the new king had summoned the infamous knight who had ended the life of the Mad King. Near the throne stood Jon Arryn, now serving as Hand of the King. His calm presence helped steady the room, but even he knew the decision Ned made today could either strengthen the crown or create powerful enemies. A few steps away, Robert Baratheon leaned against a pillar again, watching the gathering crowd with a bored expression. He had already finished half a cup of wine and looked like he expected the coming conversation to be entertaining. Finally, the great doors opened. The guards stepped aside as Jaime Lannister walked into the throne room. The knight wore the white armor of the Kingsguard, shining brightly under the torchlight. His golden hair rested on his shoulders, and his calm face showed no sign of fear. Some men in the room watched him with respect. Others looked at him with quiet anger. Many still whispered the same name whenever he passed. "Kingslayer." Jaime walked forward without hesitation until he stood before the throne. Then he dropped to one knee, bowing his head respectfully to the new king. "Your Grace." Ned Stark studied him carefully from the Iron Throne. Jaime looked young, confident, and completely at ease. It was difficult to believe this was the man who had ended the rule of the Targaryen dynasty. Ned spoke calmly, Rise, Sir Jaime. Jaime stood. The throne room became completely silent. You know why I called you here, Ned continued. Jaime's lips curved slightly into a faint smile. Because I killed a king. The blunt answer caused murmurs in the crowd. Ned remained serious. You swore an oath as a member of the Kingsguard. Jaime shrugged lightly. I did. To protect the king. Yes. And yet you placed a sword through the back of Aerys, I Targaryen. Jaime looked around the throne room for a moment before answering. Would you have preferred I let him burn the city? The words spread through the hall like fire. Ned's eyes narrowed slightly. Explain. Jaime's expression became more serious now. The Mad King had already ordered his pyromancers to hide wildfire throughout the city, barrels of it, beneath the streets, beneath the homes, beneath the sept. Several lords exchanged shocked looks. Jaime continued calmly. When your armies and Robert Baratheon's forces reached the gates, he planned to ignite the entire city. Robert straightened from the pillar immediately. Burn it, he said. Jaime nodded. Every man, woman, and child in King's Landing, hundreds of thousands of people. The room erupted into loud whispers. Ned leaned forward slightly on the throne. And you stopped him. Jaime's voice remained steady. Yes. He paused before adding something quietly. He ordered me to bring him my father's head as well. That statement caused another wave of shock. Jaime looked directly at the king now. So tell me, your grace, which oath should I have kept? The question hung heavily in the air. Ned Stark understood honor better than most men, but he also understood duty to the innocent. He looked down at Jaime thoughtfully. You could have told someone. Jaime laughed quietly. Who? The Mad King's loyal guards, his pyromancers. The city was already falling apart. There was no time. He lifted his head slightly. So I made a choice. Ned studied him for a long moment. The man before him had broken a sacred oath, but if his story was true, he had also saved the lives of hundreds of thousands. Finally, Ned stood from the Iron Throne. The hall grew quiet again. Sir Jaime Lannister, Ned said firmly. You did break your oath as a Kingsguard knight. Jaime did not react. But if what you say is true, then you also saved this city from destruction. Jaime's eyes remained steady. Ned continued. From this day forward, the truth of what happened will be known. Many people in the hall looked surprised. Ned's voice carried across the chamber. You will remain in the Kingsguard. A wave of murmurs filled the room. But understand this, Ned added firmly. The Kingsguard serves the realm, not just the king. Jaime gave a small, thoughtful smile. I can live with that, your grace. But high above the throne room, in a balcony hidden by shadow, Cersei Lannister had been watching the entire scene. She listened as the court accepted Ned Stark's judgment. Her expression remained calm, but inside she was thinking carefully. The new king had just shown the realm something important. He valued truth. He valued honor. And that made him predictable. Cersei slowly turned away from the balcony. Enjoy your throne, Stark, she whispered softly. Because the game is only beginning. And somewhere far away in the west, Tywin Lannister was already preparing his next move. Because in the world of kings and power, honor alone was never enough to survive. For a moment after the judgment, the throne room remained quiet. Many of the lords were still whispering among themselves, trying to understand the new king. Ned Stark had done something unexpected. Instead of punishing the man known across the realm as the Kingslayer, he had chosen to reveal the truth. Some saw wisdom in the decision. Others quietly wondered if the new king had just made a powerful enemy into a dangerous ally. Jaime Lannister bowed once more before turning and walking out of the throne room. His white cloak moved softly behind him as he left, but his mind was already racing. For the first time since the fall of Aerys II Targaryen, someone had finally forced the truth into the open. The whispers of Kingslayer would not disappear overnight, but the story had changed. When the doors closed behind Jaime, Robert Baratheon let out a loud breath and pushed himself away from the pillar. "Well," Robert said with a grin that was more dramatic than I expected. A few lords laughed nervously, but Jon Arryn stepped forward, his face thoughtful. "You handled that well, Your Grace," Jon said quietly. Ned Stark sat back on the Iron Throne, though the sharp metal blades behind him reminded him once again how dangerous the seat truly was. "I only told the truth," Ned replied. Jon nodded slowly. Sometimes the truth is the most dangerous weapon in the realm. Below the throne, several lords were already leaving the hall. News of the king's decision would spread through King's Landing within hours. By nightfall, every tavern and marketplace would be filled with rumors about the new king and the Kingslayer. Robert walked up the steps of the throne and leaned closer to Ned. "You realize what you just did, don't you?" Robert said. Ned raised an eyebrow. "What?" "You embarrassed the most powerful house in Westeros without even trying." Ned sighed slightly. "That was not my intention." Robert laughed. "Doesn't matter, the lions will notice." And far away from the throne room, inside a quiet chamber of the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister stood near a large window overlooking the city. The sound of the sea drifted up from Blackwater Bay while the city buzzed with rumors of the king's decision. A servant carefully entered the room. "My lady," he said nervously, "the court has accepted the king's judgment." Cersei did not turn around immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the distant towers of the castle. "So the Honorable Wolf shows mercy," she said softly. The servant waited quietly. Cersei finally turned, her green eyes cold and thoughtful. "Send a message to Tywin Lannister at Casterly Rock." "What should the message say, my lady?" Cersei's lips curved into a small, dangerous smile. "Tell my father that the new king is exactly what everyone feared." The servant hesitated. "And what is that?" Cersei walked slowly toward the door. "A good man." Her smile faded slightly. "And good men rarely survive long in King's Landing." Back in the throne room, Ned Stark watched the last of the lords leave the hall. The throne room suddenly felt much larger and much quieter. For the first time since the war ended, the new king was beginning to understand something important. Winning the throne had been the easy part. Keeping it would be far more dangerous. For the rest of that day, the halls of the Red Keep remained restless. Servants hurried through the corridors carrying messages, guards stood a little straighter than usual, and every lord who had witnessed the trial of Jaime Lannister seemed eager to spread the story across King's Landing. Word traveled fast in the capital. By sunset, the taverns near the harbor were already filled with men arguing about the decision of the new king. Some believed Eddard, Ned Stark, had shown wisdom. Others believed he had been too forgiving. Inside the Red Keep, however, Ned had little time to think about rumors. The work of ruling the realm had begun immediately. Scrolls filled his desk, each one carrying reports from different parts of Westeros. Some spoke of broken roads after the war, others of villages that had lost their crops during the long conflict. A few messages warned of small groups of former Targaryen loyalists still hiding in distant regions, hoping one day to restore the fallen dynasty. Standing beside the table, Jon Arryn calmly read through one of the reports before setting it aside. His face carried the quiet patience of a man who had spent his life guiding younger leaders. "The realm is wounded," Jon said thoughtfully, "but it is not broken." Ned nodded slowly. "Then our first duty is to help it heal." A loud voice suddenly echoed from the doorway before either man could continue. "Well said, Your Grace." Robert Baratheon entered the chamber carrying another cup of wine, looking as relaxed as ever despite the heavy matters surrounding the crown. "I just walked through half the city," Robert said with a grin. "You should hear the people talking about you." Ned looked up from the table. "And what are they saying?" Robert laughed. "Most of them are surprised you didn't throw the Kingslayer into a dungeon." Jon Arryn folded his hands. "People often expect simple solutions to complicated problems." Robert leaned against the wall and shrugged. "Well, I still say the man did us a favor. If he hadn't stabbed Aerys II Targaryen, we might have arrived in the city only to find it burning." Ned remained quiet for a moment. He had thought about that possibility more than once since hearing Jaime's explanation. The idea that the entire city could have been destroyed by wildfire still felt unreal. "The past cannot be changed," Ned said finally, "but the future can." Jon Arryn nodded in agreement. "Then we must shape it carefully." That evening, as darkness slowly settled over King's Landing, torches were lit across the city walls and along the streets. Ships moved quietly through Blackwater Bay while merchants closed their shops for the night. The capital felt alive again after the chaos of war. Yet not everyone welcomed the new peace. In a private chamber deep within the castle, Cersei Lannister sat at a long table covered with maps and letters. A single candle flickered beside her, casting shadows along the stone walls. One of her servants carefully placed a sealed message in front of her. "My lady, the raven is ready." Cersei studied the letter she had just finished writing. It was addressed to Tywin Lannister at Casterly Rock. Her father had always taught her that power was never given freely. It had to be taken, protected, and sometimes fought for. Cersei sealed the letter with hot wax and pressed the Lannister lion into it. "Send it," she said calmly. The servant bowed and quickly left the room. Cersei stood and walked toward the window overlooking the dark city below. Somewhere in the castle, the new king was likely still working late into the night, trying to repair a broken kingdom with honor and fairness. She allowed herself a quiet smile. "Honor," she whispered softly. To Cersei, honor was a weakness. It made people predictable, and predictable rulers were easier to defeat. But across the castle, Ned Stark stood alone in the throne room once again. The massive iron throne loomed behind him as he looked out over the empty hall. For a brief moment, he remembered the quiet forests of Winterfell and the peaceful snows of the north. Life there had always been simple. Justice had been clear. Here in King's Landing, justice was wrapped in politics, ambition, and secrets. Ned placed a hand on one of the cold metal blades of the throne. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. Powerful houses would test him. Old enemies would watch for weakness. New dangers would rise as the realm slowly recovered from war. But he had accepted the crown for one reason: duty. And no matter how dangerous the Game of Thrones became, Ned Stark intended to rule the Seven Kingdoms the same way he had ruled the North. With honor, even if honor proved to be the most dangerous weapon of all. The next morning, the Red Keeper woke with a different energy. Word of Ned Stark's judgment of Jaime Lannister had already spread across King's Landing, and whispers filled the corridors. Some lords muttered about the king's mercy, while others wondered if such a move would make the Northmen vulnerable. Ned, however, was already thinking beyond mere perception. There were more pressing matters: laws to enforce, armies to organize, and alliances to secure. The weight of ruling a fractured realm was far heavier than any battle he had fought. In the council chamber, Jon Arryn waited patiently as Ned entered. The sun streamed through the tall windows, illuminating piles of scrolls and maps laid across the table. Reports from the Riverlands, the Vale, and even the distant reaches of Dawn had arrived overnight. Each contained news of unrest, recovery, or plots waiting to unfold. Jon handed a parchment to Ned, his steady eyes reflecting both concern and counsel. "Your Grace," Jon said quietly, "there are reports of minor skirmishes in the Riverlands. Some lords have refused to acknowledge your rule fully." Ned studied the paper, noting the names of the men who had refused to swear loyalty. "These are not acts of rebellion," he said slowly. They are tests. They want to see whether the Iron Throne is ruled by fear or by justice. Jon nodded. And what will you do? I will meet them in person, Ned replied firmly. A king cannot rely solely on messengers and letters. The realm must see the ruler who values truth above all. Meanwhile, in the shadowed halls of the Red Keep, not all eyes were on Ned. High in a balcony shrouded in darkness, Cersei Lannister whispered to herself as she watched servants and courtiers moving below. Her plan was already taking shape. Ned's honor was admirable, but it was predictable, and in King's Landing, predictability could be exploited. They will test him, she murmured, and when they do, he will learn that not all men value justice above ambition. Back in the council chamber, Ned began outlining his first reforms. Roads damaged during the war needed repair. Grain supplies were low in several regions, and many peasants were starving. Taxes would have to be collected carefully, enough to rebuild the kingdom, but not so much as to provoke rebellion. Each decision carried consequences, and Ned weighed them like a sword in his hand, knowing even the smallest misstep could cost lives. Robert Baratheon, lounging casually against the wall, let out a laugh. All this talk of rebuilding, I miss the war. At least then everyone knew who to hate. Ned shot him a sharp look. This is not about hatred, Robert. It is about survival. Robert waved his hand dismissively. Bah, survival is boring, but I suppose someone has to do the boring work. Jon Arryn cleared his throat and turned the attention back to the scrolls. Your Grace, there are also rumors that some of the remaining Targaryen loyalists are gathering in secret, small bands but organized. Ned's expression darkened. Then we will root them out before they grow stronger. The realm cannot endure another rebellion so soon. As Ned made his plans, a shadow moved quietly along the corridors outside the chamber. A servant passed messages, unaware that some were already being intercepted by eyes hidden in the walls. In King's Landing, secrets never slept, and the Red Keep was full of whispers that could change the fate of the realm before the sun even set. High above, Cersei considered the possibilities. If Ned was too slow or too fair, the Lannisters would gain advantage. But if he acted too quickly, he might alienate allies. Her lips curved into a thin, dangerous smile. She had learned long ago that the game of power was won not by the strongest swords, but by the cleverest minds. Meanwhile, Ned knew that every decision he made would echo across Westeros, from the north to the south. He had come to King's Landing not to conquer, but to rule rightly. Yet he understood that a single misstep, a single misjudgment, could turn the fragile peace into chaos once more. Outside, the city stirred. Traders began opening their stalls, and children ran through the streets, laughing as though the horrors of war were already forgotten. But for Ned, there was no forgetting. Every face, every report, every whisper of rebellion reminded him of the fragility of peace and the constant vigilance a king must maintain. Even as he walked the corridors of the Red Keep, preparing to meet the lords from the Riverlands, Ned Stark felt the weight of a kingdom balanced on honor, duty, and truth. And far beyond the castle walls, hidden schemes were already in motion, ready to test the mettle of the man who had claimed the Iron Throne. The next morning, Ned rode out of the Red Keep, accompanied by a small contingent of his personal guards. The streets of King's Landing were already busy, with merchants setting up their stalls, children darting between carts, and townsfolk exchanging the latest news of the king's judgment of Jaime Lannister. Some stopped to bow or nod respectfully as the king passed, while others whispered among themselves, questioning whether a man of honor could truly survive in a city built on deceit. Ned paid them little mind. His focus was on the Riverlands lords, many of whom had been slow to declare loyalty since the war ended. Their attitudes would set the tone for his rule beyond the city walls. He arrived at the small council chambers set up for the meeting, where the lords of the Riverlands were already waiting, a mixture of impatience and curiosity on their faces. Some wore expressions of distrust, their arms crossed as they measured the man who had taken the Iron Throne with no claim of fire or blood. Ned dismounted his horse and offered a calm nod, letting the silence stretch for a moment. It was always better to let men settle their unease before speaking. Lords of the Riverlands, Ned began, his voice carrying authority without arrogance, I come not to punish you for the choices made during the war. I come to rebuild, not to sow more division. The realm needs peace, and the people need protection." A few of the lords exchanged skeptical glances. One, a grizzled man with a scar across his cheek, finally spoke. "King Stark, words are easy, but how do we know you will enforce them? Many kings promise justice, few deliver it." Ned's gaze was steady. "Because I will be judged not by words, but by deeds. Any lord who acts against the safety of his people or the unity of the realm will answer for it, no matter his name or title." A tense silence followed. The words carried weight, and slowly the expressions of doubt shifted into cautious acknowledgement. Ned could sense that some of these men were already beginning to respect his honesty, even if they did not yet trust him. Meanwhile, back in the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister observed the movements of the Riverlands lords from her private chamber. A map lay before her, dotted with the positions of loyalists, potential rebels, and undecided houses. Tywin's instructions had been clear: let the new king feel the weight of responsibility, but do not interfere directly, allow him to stumble. Every hesitation, every act of fairness could be turned against him. Cersei's green eyes glinted as she considered her next step. By the time Ned returned to King's Landing that evening, messages from his scouts had already arrived. Several small bands of Targaryen loyalists had been spotted moving through the northern hills, likely hopping to find support or a safe haven. Ned called Jon Arryn and Robert to the council chambers immediately. "We cannot let them regroup," Ned said firmly, spreading a map across the table. "If they gain momentum, it will undo everything we have fought for." Robert grinned, slamming his hand onto the table. "Then we ride. Let's show them that the Wolf King doesn't wait for danger to come to him." Jon Arryn placed a calming hand on Robert's arm. "Patience, Robert. We must move carefully. A rash attack could turn neutral lords against the crown." Ned nodded. "We will act strategically, send word to the northern garrisons, secure the passes, and ensure that no loyalist groups can travel freely. The realm must see that the king protects it first and punishes only when necessary." As plans were laid, the shadows in King's Landing shifted. Cersei's spies moved through the city, collecting whispers of dissent and plotting to exploit even the smallest cracks. The game of power was far from over, and although Ned Stark had proven himself a man of honor, every step he took in this new role would be scrutinized, challenged, and tested. Above all, Ned felt a cold certainty. Ruling a kingdom was far more complex than commanding an army. For every life he saved or injustice he corrected, enemies were watching, waiting for a single mistake. And in the dark corners of the Red Keep and beyond, there were those already preparing to test whether the Wolf King's honor was a strength or a weakness. The following morning, Ned left the city once again, riding toward the northern passes of the Riverlands. His goal was to intercept the small groups of Targaryen loyalists before they could organize into a larger threat. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of smoke from the kitchens of the nearby villages, and the roads were quiet except for the occasional cart or horseman. Even in these peaceful stretches, Ned felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Every lord who remained loyal or disloyal was a piece in a dangerous puzzle. One wrong move could spark rebellion, and one delayed decision could cost lives. Arriving at the first small village, Ned dismounted and walked among the people, his presence commanding respect without intimidation. Villagers looked up at the King of the Seven Kingdoms with a mix of awe and uncertainty. Many had suffered under raiding parties during the war, while others had lost loved ones to previous battles. Ned listened carefully to their concerns, asking questions about food, security, and rumors of Targaryen loyalists in the surrounding hills. "I have heard whispers," one elderly man said nervously. "Strangers move through the woods at night. They speak of restoring the king who burned the city." Ned nodded, his face grim. "Then we will find them. No man or woman in the Seven Kingdoms should live in fear of rebellion while I sit on the Iron Throne." Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Cersei Lannister met secretly with a few trusted allies. Candles flickered across the room as she laid out her plan. Every loyalist movement and every wavering lord was a piece she could manipulate. Her father, Tywin, had taught her that patience and cunning were more powerful than swords. With the new king focused on rebuilding the realm and pursuing scattered rebels, Cersei knew the moment to strike politically would come soon. "You think he will last?" one of her advisors asked cautiously. Cersei's smile was thin and calculating. "A man who rules by honor can survive for now, but men of honor are predictable, and predictability can be used to control them or to destroy them." Back on the road, Ned's forces tracked a small band of loyalists moving through a wooded area. The group had no idea the king himself was on their trail. As Ned observed from a hilltop, he considered his options carefully. He could strike immediately and risk unnecessary bloodshed, or he could position his men to cut off escape routes and force a surrender. Duty, honor, and strategy all weighed in his mind simultaneously. Choosing the careful approach, Ned gave quiet instructions to his captains. "We take no unnecessary lives. They are rebels, yes, but they are still men. Give them a chance to surrender before the sword is drawn." Hours later, the loyalists were surrounded, realizing too late that escape was impossible. When Ned rode down to meet them, the sight of the wolf banner at the head of his column caused some to drop their weapons immediately. Others hesitated, but Ned's calm, commanding presence left no doubt. "Your cause is lost," he said simply. "Surrender and you will be treated fairly. Resist and you will answer with your lives." One of the men stepped forward, hands raised. "We only serve the Targaryen blood. We will never kneel to a Stark." Ned's grey eyes were steady. "Then you will see that honor does not require blind obedience. You may survive if you choose the right course." One by one, the rebels dropped their weapons. Ned oversaw their disarmament personally, ensuring that no harm came to those who yielded. For the first time, many of these men understood what it meant to face a king who ruled with justice, not fear. But far away, in the shadows of King's Landing, Cersei's spies were already reporting every move. The Lannisters watched carefully, noting that Ned's honor was admired by the small folk, but could also be twisted against him. The wheels of court intrigue began to turn even faster, as Cersei prepared to test the king's judgment in ways that swords and armies could not. And in the distance, the Wolf King knew that his work had only just begun. Every loyalist subdued, every lord convinced, and every village stabilized was another step toward true rule, but also another signal to enemies that honor alone was not enough to survive in a kingdom built on ambition, deception, and power. As the loyalists were escorted back to secure camps, Ned allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. Even though no lives had been unnecessarily lost, the event reminded him that rebellion was never fully defeated by force alone. Words, strategy, and perception were just as important as the sword. Every man who yielded today would carry a story of the Wolf King's fairness, and every man who resisted would quietly plot how to regain what he had lost. Power, Ned realized, was measured not only by victories, but by the fear and respect a ruler commanded in equal measure. Back in King's Landing, Cersei Lannister had begun to quietly sow discord among the nobles. She invited select lords to private meetings under the pretense of allegiance, praising the king's fairness while subtly questioning his ability to act decisively when danger struck. By suggesting that Ned's sense of honor might hinder his judgment, she planted seeds of doubt in their minds. Each lord left her presence convinced that while the Wolf King could be trusted with justice, he might not be able to protect their personal interests if tested. Meanwhile, Ned returned to the Red Keep under a sunset sky that painted the city in shades of fire and gold. The banners of House Stark fluttered against the wind as he dismounted, and he was met by Jon Arryn, who had been reviewing reports from the southern provinces. "Your Grace," Jon said, "the lords of the Riverlands are uneasy. Some fear that the king's leniency toward rebels may set a dangerous precedent." Ned frowned slightly. "Then we must show them that mercy is not weakness. Justice and strength can coexist, but they must see it with their own eyes." As evening fell, messages arrived from distant parts of the realm. Dawn had raised questions about the crown's intentions, while loyalists in the Stormlands whispered about opportunities to test the new king. The game of politics was unfolding even faster than the aftermath of war. Each letter, each report reminded Ned that a ruler's enemies could be invisible and silent, striking in whispers before swords were drawn. That night, as Ned walked the empty corridors of the Red Keep, he felt the weight of unseen eyes on him. He knew Cersei Lannister was watching, her plans hidden behind her calm, calculating face, and he understood that Tywin Lannister would be ready to exploit any misstep, no matter how small. The king's honor had already won respect, but in King's Landing, respect was fragile and ambition was tireless. In the courtyard below, soldiers patrolled the walls with steady steps. Their presence reassured the small folk, but it also reminded Ned that the peace he fought to establish was temporary unless carefully protected. Every lord, every merchant, and every commoner was a thread in the delicate web of power. Tug too hard on one, and the entire fabric of the realm could unravel. Meanwhile, Cersei convened her closest advisors in a hidden chamber. "The Wolf King believes he can rule with honor," she said softly, her fingers tracing the edges of a map. "Let him think that. Every action he takes gives us information. Every decision reveals weakness. And when the time comes, we will strike where he cannot defend." Her words echoed faintly in the quiet stone room, carrying the promise of schemes yet to unfold. In King's Landing, the shadow of intrigue was growing. The city had been spared from fire and sword, but the sparks of political conflict were already igniting. And above it all, Ned Stark understood one truth more clearly than ever. Ruling the Seven Kingdoms was not just about punishing the guilty or protecting the innocent. It was about seeing every hidden move, every whispered word, and every ambition lurking in the hearts of men, and ensuring that honor remained stronger than deceit, if only for a little while. The following morning, Ned received word that one of the more powerful lords of the Riverlands, Lord Roderick Tully, had refused to swear full loyalty to the Iron Throne. His men had fortified a small keep near the Mummers Ford, and scouts reported that his bannermen were quietly gathering in the surrounding hills. This was the first major test of Ned's authority beyond mere words. He could march immediately with his forces, crushing the rebellion by force, but that would risk alienating other lords who were still uncertain of his rule. Instead, Ned chose a measured approach, one that combined diplomacy, presence, and strategic strength. Accompanied by a small force of trusted knights and northern men, Ned rode toward the rebellious keep. On the way, he stopped in villages along the route, speaking directly with the small folk. They were wary of the conflict, but seeing the king himself traveling among them inspired confidence. Mothers whispered thanks, children waved, and merchants offered small gifts of bread and fruit. It reminded Ned of the responsibility he bore, not just to lords and banners, but to the ordinary people of Westeros. Each life mattered, and every decision would echo far beyond the battlefield. When he arrived at the keep, Ned sent a messenger ahead, offering Lord Roderick a chance to speak directly. The gates opened slowly, and a wary face appeared above the walls. The lord's expression was a mixture of defiance and curiosity, as if he could not quite believe the Northern King would meet him in person rather than attacking immediately. "I come to speak, not to strike," Ned said, his voice calm and firm. "The realm has suffered enough. You can join peacefully, and I will ensure your lands and people are protected, or you can resist, and I will have no choice but to act decisively." Lord Roderick's eyes narrowed. "And why should I trust the word of a man from the north? You rule over strangers, not us." Ned's grey eyes met his, because honor is not bound by geography, it is bound by choice. "Choose wisely, Lord Tully. I am king, yes, but I am also a man who keeps his word. Your people will not suffer if you act justly." The lord hesitated, and for a long moment the wind carried only the quiet sound of horses shifting beneath their riders. Then, slowly, he descended the steps of the keep to meet Ned face to face. Bannermen watched nervously from the walls, unsure if this peace would hold. Back in King's Landing, Cersei Lannister received reports of the encounter through her network of spies. She smiled quietly to herself, noting that Ned's insistence on honor and negotiation would inspire loyalty among some, but it would also frustrate and anger others who expected intimidation and fear. Every action of the king, she realized, was a double-edged sword, and she intended to use that knowledge to her advantage. Meanwhile, Ned spent hours in discussion with Lord Roderick and his advisors. He listened to their concerns, addressed grievances from the war, and outlined how the crown intended to rebuild the realm fairly. Slowly, the tension in the keep eased. The Lord agreed to swear loyalty, not blindly, but with a recognition that Ned's word would be upheld in all matters concerning justice, law, and protection of his people. As the banners of House Tully were lowered in submission and replaced with the Wolf of the North flying alongside their own, Ned felt a small measure of relief. The realm had gained its first loyal ally through negotiation rather than bloodshed, a rarity in the Seven Kingdoms. Yet he knew this was only the beginning. For every loyal lord, there would be another testing the king's resolve. And somewhere in the shadows, Cersei Lannister and her father Tywin were already plotting how to turn patience into vulnerability. Returning to the Red Keep that evening, Ned rode under the fading light of the sun, the city sprawling beneath him. The streets were quieter than usual, but the air was still thick with whispers of politics, ambition, and hidden threats. The Wolf King understood that the challenges of ruling were not just in battlefields or fortified keeps. They were in whispers behind closed doors, in alliances that shifted like sand, and in the ambition of those who would never stop scheming. Ned dismounted and walked through the Red Keep, the familiar weight of the Iron Throne looming over him as he entered the council chambers. Jon Arryn awaited him, maps spread across the table, with new reports pouring in from across the realm. "Your Grace," Jon said, "the loyalists in the south are watching closely. If news spreads that you handle rebellion with fairness, it may encourage some houses to test your patience." Ned nodded, placing a hand on the table. "Then we must act with both fairness and vigilance. Strength does not always shout, it often waits quietly, prepared for the moment it is needed." Outside, the wind carried the faint whispers of King's Landing. Somewhere in the city, Cersei's schemes were taking shape. The Game of Thrones had only just begun, and Ned Stark was learning that ruling by honor was far more dangerous than any battle he had ever fought. Months passed since Ned Stark had claimed the Iron Throne. The realm, still scarred by war, began to stabilize under his rule. Lords who had once doubted him now approached with cautious respect, realizing that the Wolf King was neither cruel nor weak. Justice had become his sword, fairness his shield. The small folk whispered his name with hope rather than fear, and for the first time in years, the people of King's Landing felt that the crown cared for more than politics, it cared for life itself. Yet the city remained a nest of whispers and schemes. Cersei Lannister, the Iron Throne, stood silent, no longer just a symbol of conquest or fear. It had become a reminder of responsibility, of choices that affected millions, and of the rare chance to rule a kingdom not through terror, but through justice. Somewhere far away, Cersei Lannister's schemes continued. Tywin Lannister's eyes watched patiently, and the wheels of politics turned ever onward. But for now, Ned Stark had done what few thought possible. He had ruled Westeros with honor, tempered by wisdom and courage, proving that a man of conscience could sit on the Iron Throne, and perhaps change the course of history itself. As night fell over Westeros, the Wolf King remained vigilant. The Game of Thrones would never truly end, but he had shown the realm a different way, a way guided by truth, justice, and the unyielding strength of honor. The end.